Okay, we should be live. Just want to make sure this is working. If you're out there, if you let me know if I can hear you, I'd appreciate that. You know what? I feel like that didn't work. No, looks like it did work. All right. I believe we are live. If we are not, and I film this and find out I wasn't live, well, that will piss me off. But we will see. So if you're out there, if you could let me know you could hear me, I'd appreciate that. And as always, good morning, Internet. So, as I embark on my journey to help people separate the concepts of school and education, I have to help people go through the process that I went through myself. And you could go back all the way to Plato and Aristotle, but a person cannot grow, a person cannot obtain a true understanding of the world until they begin to understand themselves. And for most of us, that can be a very difficult process. The process of accumulating self-knowledge. It requires looking inwards. It requires evaluating your own personal flaws, and we all have many, and it's easier to look to the outside world and say everything is wrong outside of me. It's difficult to look inward and say, this is what I struggle with, and this is what I need to do better. But for me as a homeschooler, knowing myself was very important, because if we don't know who we are, then we will undoubtedly pass along some of our flaws to our children. In fact, we will do that regardless, but we'd like to limit that to the greatest extent possible. Now, whether you homeschool or whether you send your children to public school, if you're here because you want your children to grow up stronger. You want them to grow up independent, capable of taking care of themselves. And in order to do that, you need to provide them the best environment possible for that to happen. So that starts with knowledge of self. And we're going to get into what type of things we need to evaluate and why knowledge of self is so important when it comes to raising children. So, let's start with the one thing that impacts us more than anything else in our lives, and that is our parents. Now, the last few days I've been speaking about the fork concept, because with every decision we make as parents, there is a fork in the road. Your child's development will be different based on everything that you do, just as your development was different based on everything that your parents did. I spoke about this the other day when I talked about the two children, child A and child B. One was homeschooled and one went to public school. Well, the fork in the road would be this. The child that went to public school, he fell behind in his reading, got to 6th grade, but never mastered 5th grade reading. Well, when he got to the 6th grade, the teacher said, "Can you please read in front of the class?" He got embarrassed and developed an aversive relationship to reading. Because of that, he started to call the students that read nerds. And we see this in public schools all over the country. And that student, because he develops an aversive relationship to reading, by the time he gets to high school, won't read at all. Take student B. He's homeschooled, and he too, by the time he got to 6th grade level, was only reading at, hadn't mastered the 5th grade reading comprehension. But because he was homeschooled, he wasn't forced to go ahead with the class. He took an extra month, an extra 2 months, mastered 5th grade reading comprehension, and moved on to 6th grade reading comprehension. He might start slower, but will eventually be a master reader because an aversive relationship to reading is never developed. This is the fork in the road concept. And with everything we do as parents, there is a fork in the road, whether we understand it or not. So it is best, it is wisest to attempt to understand ourselves, to attempt to understand where we come from, and attempt to understand our parents. Now, before I get into this, I would like to say that I had, personally, the greatest parents anyone could have ever asked for. There is a reason that I was able to, or I have been able to do what I've been able to do on the internet. Because I started by talking about history, politics, and what people would call conspiracy theories. And for anyone that's actually done that, really done that, made documentaries, you know that you put yourself out there like that on the internet and you will be called every name in the book. You will be socially ostracized. Your friends will tell you that you've become a weird person. So it takes an immense amount of confidence to be able to do that. And all of my confidence, all of my not worrying about social ostracization, as I'm doing this right now, talking about parenting, many people who haven't followed my work, people I grew up with, would say, oh, look at this asshole. But the reason I'm able to do that is because I have confidence instilled by me from the unconditional love given to me by my parents. So before I get into it, I just wanted to note, Mom and Dad, if you do catch this, I have nothing but respect for everything you've done. So we all have our parents. And sorry about the smoke detector. I have to change the battery. I know it's annoying. So we all have our parents. And they raise us in certain ways. Some of our parents yell. My mom always told me a good story that the house she grew up in, her father, my grandfather, was always screaming. And that did damage to some of her siblings, but she made it a point that she would never be in a relationship where she was screaming, especially she didn't want her children to see that. And I thank her for that because I never saw my mother and father yell at each other. My house was very calm in that way, very loving in that way, and that's because she knew herself. She understood where she came from, and she knew that she didn't like that aspect of her life. And what she did was she changed the cycle. But the problem is that most people don't know themselves, and they repeat the cycles in one way or another that they repeat what their parents did to them to their children. And this is why we see intergenerational problems within our society, and this is where a lot of our society's problems come from. So some parents yell, and their children grow up seeing that, and this is a toxic part of being in a relationship. This isn't communication. This is, in a way, it's about power within a relationship. And children grow up and become adults, and they get in their own relationships, and how do they handle things? They yell. And then their children see them yell, and the cycle continues. Many relationships, many parents are abusive. They hit their children. I'm going to do a whole episode and probably write an article on why you should never lay your hands on your child. I know that's weird from the guy that just yesterday did a video titled, Why Parents Should Introduce Their Children to Violence. But there is a significant difference between what I described as introducing a child to violence and hitting a child. You introduce your child to violence, why? Because the world is violent. So you introduce them in a safe way. You teach them Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu by signing them up in classes, karate, wrestling. You sign them up for competitive sports so they learn how to use their body safely and comfortably. They understand their power against other people, other human beings. You put them on a soccer field, they understand how to use leverage. You put them on a lacrosse field, they understand how to use their body to hit someone else's body. And all of these sports work to teach them what they're physically capable of and introduce them to violence because the world itself is violence. But home should always be peaceful. But many children are hit by their parents. And we see this intergenerationally because children that are hit by their parents generally grow up to be children that hit. I myself am breaking that cycle. When my father wasn't happy with me, he would spank me. Now, it didn't do any lasting damage to me. Love my father, is fine. But for many people, that becomes a troublesome situation. So we want to grow up without hitting our children, but that becomes a cycle that we repeat. Many households have sexual abuse. Thank God I didn't experience that, but what we see is many people who are sexual abusers were actually victims of sexual abuse themselves. This is statistically very significant because people don't break cycles and people become what their experience was because they don't know themselves. So yelling, physical violence, sexual abuse are all cycles that people fail to break because they fail to take the time to ever get to know themselves. And sadly, when they don't get to know themselves, it negatively affects them their entire lives, not just their children's lives. But as parents, it's our job to understand where we came from, what our parents did right and what our parents did wrong. This way we can make adjustments and our children could have even better upbringings based on our knowledge of self. Even the most simple things, smoking, drinking. My father, again, I'm not bagging on him, he is a phenomenal man, drinks all the time. And if you look at my siblings, there is a very high rate of drinking in my family, and the reason for that is because we all grew up seeing it. In fact, when I was 12 years old, I routinely had alcohol because it's what I grew up seeing. It's what was normalized to me. And when my wife was pregnant, and I started to think about these things, I was still, up until the time she got pregnant, getting drunk all the time. I realized, I sat back for a second and said, this isn't the most productive thing I do in my life. And I don't want this for my child. And over the course of my wife's pregnancy, I had gone from drinking multiple times a week, every week, to over the course of my wife's pregnancy, almost 10 months, I had got through that period by only drinking probably 4 times in that 10-month period, which is a remarkable instant turnaround. And my child's currently 13 months old, and I probably had drinks on maybe 6 or 7 occasions over that 13-month period, because I don't want my child to grow up seeing me drinking all the time. Otherwise, do as I do, not as I say. My child will see that and follow that cycle. These are the things that a lot of parents don't think about, but these are the things that should be thought about the most. Because how can you raise a child if you don't first know thyself? Again, this goes back to Plato. This goes back to Aristotle. This is what the greatest philosophers in human history spoke about. And me, myself, I do consider myself to be a modern philosopher. That's how I got involved in my politics. And that's why I'm transitioning to the raising of children, because it's the most important thing to me. There is no higher calling, and it is the primary way in which we could change society from a grassroots level. Many parents eat unhealthy. We see in America there is an epidemic of diabetes. There is an epidemic of heart disease. There is an epidemic of cancer. How many people do you know personally that have had diabetes? How many people do you know personally that have suffered from heart disease, from cancer? The primary cause of those diseases is lifestyle. People eat unhealthy. They smoke, they drink, they eat unhealthy. And one of the primary reasons for that is people see their parents eating unhealthy. This has been a personal journey that I've gone on over the last few years, where I've slowly gotten better and better at eating, and I've slowly started to understand food more and more. In fact, just in the very short term, over the last 3 weeks, or 2.5 weeks, I've been completely vegetarian. Now, I've gone through bouts in my life where I've been vegetarian, where I've been vegan, and where I eat a ton of meat. So I'm not perfect at this, but I'm trying to know myself, trying to better myself, And especially with the child, I understand my child will see what I do. Will do what I do, not what I say. And that's why we're working on things, my wife and I, weekly. We do family meal prep. This is great activities to do with the child. What do? You ask them what they want to eat this week. You have them fill out a grocery list. This is what we're going to get. You talk about the grocery list. Are we getting our carbs? Are we getting our proteins? Are we getting our vegetables, our fruits? You go to the grocery store and together you pick out the groceries. And you have them read the ingredients on the back of the groceries so that they start to learn what ingredients go into food. You can do projects where you have them research some of the ingredients they read about on the back of the food packets. Now they're learning to do research. Now they're learning to think critically, while at the same time they're understanding what it means to eat healthy. This is about breaking cycles. How many people do you know that don't break this cycle and pass it on to their children? How many 5-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 15-year-olds suffer from obesity at an age where they absolutely shouldn't? A large part of that is a result of parents that don't know thyself. Many parents are overprotective. Many parents are underprotective. I think that's self-explanatory, but I'll get more into it over here. Children see their parents blame others for their problems. And this is very easy to do. We've all done it. I think I've done it many times. But we have a problem in our lives, or our parents had a problem in our lives, and we say, you know what? This problem isn't my fault. This problem is this person's fault. And there may be truth to that. But when your child is watching, they will do as they see. And when they see you blaming others for your problems, you're giving them the okay to blame others for their problems. And as a parent, you want to go out of your way to take responsibility for your own problems to the maximum extent possible, so that your children it will click in their mind that they should take responsibility for their own problems, because that will only empower them in life. Pointing fingers, it feels good, but it doesn't empower. Many parents ignore their children. This is, in my opinion, absolutely grotesque. I actually read on Twitter yesterday, someone had tweeted out that their biggest regret in life was having a child. What a horrible, horrible thing to tweet out, to put on the internet for the whole world to see. What a damaging thing for a child to see. That person should repent, because what they did is one of the worst things you could ever do. But many people ignore their children, and then their children see that cycle, and again, they have children and repeat it. So we have to understand who we are. We have to understand where we come from. Because if we don't, what we do is what most people do, is we repeat the cycle. And as parents, it's our responsibility to break that cycle. And when we break that cycle, when we attempt to achieve self-knowledge, what we're actually doing is passing on wisdom to our children, right? Because you hit, that's not healthy for your child. Obviously, sexual abuse isn't healthy. You yell, it's not healthy. You smoke and drink, it's not healthy. You eat unhealthy, it's not healthy. Overprotecting, underprotecting, they could be problems. Blaming others is not healthy. Ignoring is not healthy. But when you start to understand, for whatever of these things or other things happened in your life, when you start to understand and know thyself and achieve self-knowledge, you then pass that knowledge to your children. Knowledge only becomes wisdom when it is transferred from one person to another. So by knowing thyself and changing your lifestyle accordingly, your knowledge becomes your child's wisdom. That is the fork in the road. And with every decision we make as parents, we must consider how it will impact the fork in the road. Now, The right side of this fork, because with the left side, I spoke about generalities. Things that happen, some that happened in my life, but things that happen in children's lives and parents' life that they don't correct and it becomes a cycle. On the right side, I'll talk a little bit about my life and my own upbringing, because I'd be a little hypocritical if I didn't get into it here. To start, I was the most loved child I think the world has ever seen. It's where all of my confidence comes from. It's why I can do this on the internet and not worry about people saying nasty things or the potential of failure, the potential of people not watching, the potential of ridicule. I can handle all of that. I'm very good at it. It's why I broke into the politics when I was doing it, because the love I had was always unconditional. In my opinion, there is nothing more valuable you can give to a child than unconditional love. Because with that, they will believe in themselves, and with that, they will pursue who they really are. It's how I became a person that would describe myself as a modern-day philosopher. I was always encouraged. I was encouraged to chase whatever I was interested in, to chase my dreams. Now, unfortunately, a lot of my dreams growing up involved getting drunk and chasing girls, but as I've gotten older, you can see I'm a person that is innovative, that chases their dreams, that doesn't worry about what other people think, and that came from my parents. I was always protected. I knew that whatever problems the world gave to me, I always had my mother and my father and my siblings, and I could rely on them to have my back, and there was something very valuable in that. I remember when I was in 9th grade, I got in a fist fight with a 12th grader. He's a big guy. I thought I handled myself pretty well. I had a black eye, whatever. So I got home, and my sister was my sister. She was 5 years older than me. And she, what happened? What happened? I said, I got a fist fight with this guy. And she knew he was a year younger than her, and she's 5 years older than me. And I found out, I found out that a few weeks later that she had her friend go and intimidate this guy. And then I went to my sister. I said, please don't do that. First off, it's embarrassing. I can handle my own stuff. And second of all, it's really inappropriate. It's just really inappropriate. And I went to the guy that I originally got in the fist fight with, and I apologized and said, listen, that wasn't me. We handled our stuff. That was that. So, but I was always protected. But at times in my life, because of that, I was overprotected. And the example I would use as jobs, right? For instance, the jobs I had growing up, my parents always made sure that they were jobs that they had given to me, or a friend had agreed to give to me. The problem with that is that it didn't force me to go on job interviews, and job interviews are valuable training, right? So on the one hand, my parents were protecting me; they were making sure I got a job. On the other hand, they were denying me valuable experience of going out and doing job interviews, and because of that. At times, and not anymore, I've worked to remedy that, but at times I'd go on job interviews and my heart would pump and I'd have all this anxiety because I didn't have experience because I was overprotected as a kid. Music class. When I was in 6th grade, I wasn't a musical child at all. And which, by the way, talk about knowing myself. I have a piano next to me and I've been teaching myself piano and working on my 13-month-old. He loves to play the piano. It's hilarious. He's pretty good for a 13-month-old. You should maybe I'll have him play for you guys. But he plays the piano, and I've been working to teach myself because I know thyself. Because I know that I wasn't a musical child, that I always rejected the idea of learning music. But if I don't know myself, then my child will do the same thing. So instead, he's growing up in a music-rich environment. This is what it means to know thyself. But I was also overprotected because rather than trying to put me in a music-rich environment. When I was in 6th grade, I didn't want anything to do with music class. So my mother went to the school, and she fought with the school and said, he doesn't like music, he shouldn't have to be in this class. And she actually had an exemption, got an exemption, and they took me out of the class. Now, she felt like she was protecting me, and I appreciate that, but it actually made me less complete of a person. It made me a little weaker. First off, if she wanted me out of the music class, if she decided that it was okay for me to be out of the music class, that's fine. But the way to go about it from self-knowledge would have been, okay, well, you need to talk to your counselors, you need to talk to the principal, and you need to come to some type of agreement that you can replace your music class and do something else. Because that would have given me the negotiating skills that would have been valuable in life. So in that case, I was overprotected. But notice how I know myself. I know that I was overprotected. I know that I'm not a musical person, and because of that, I know that if my son's in a similar situation in the world, he's not going to school, but in the world, because I will be encouraging him to, full disclosure, I expect by 12 years old my son to be able to get out into the world and fully operate as an autonomous human being. So I will encourage him to get out into the world, and although I'll be looming over and making sure he's physically safe and emotionally safe, I will also be encouraging him to get involved in his own negotiations, to go on interviews and do all of that, because I know that will make him stronger. But I only know that from my self-knowledge. And at the same time, he already loves to play the piano. I never cared about music at all. Again, that's my self-knowledge. I don't know music. I'm not good at music. Let me teach it to myself now, and let me make sure my child grows up in a music-rich environment. We break cycles by achieving self-knowledge. So in order to raise our children right, we have to first take a lot of time analyzing where we came from and who we are, what our strengths are, and what our weaknesses are. Script. And again, I hate doing this because I don't want to get the wrong impression. I had the greatest parents in the world. This is, when you attempt to achieve self-knowledge, you have to analyze the faults in your own upbringing. So don't take this in the wrong way. Script. Confession, I don't write scripts. I should, by the way. I have to teach that to myself, and I will be teaching it to myself. When my child gets to the age to learn script, I'll be learning it with him and making sure he learns it, because he's not going to not know it because I don't know it. I can read it, but I don't write it. And the reason for that is my 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade teachers didn't write script. So my parents, they went to the school and they fought with them and said, this is ridiculous. The children should be learning script. And the school vetoed them. They said, no, their teachers don't know script. And then that was it. Well, again, self-knowledge. Well, the response should have been, well, school's not responsible for my child's education. I am, and they should have taught me script. Well, I know that with things like music, with things like script, whatever it is, I know that I have to teach them to myself, and I have to make it a point that my child learns them. And that's all part of self-knowledge, knowing thyself, so that our children can be stronger people. I was enabled a lot in my childhood. Again, Mom and Dad, if you're watching this is not a bash on you. This is just, I'm a philosophical person, and I break down strengths and weaknesses in my own upbringing so that I could do an even better job than you did with my children. Like I said, the love, the encouragement, and the protection I got from my parents are the reason I'm in front of you right now. They have empowered me in a way that I could not be thankful enough for. And the only reason I do this publicly is because my new life mission is to help parents become better parents so that their children can grow strong and our society can be a better place. But I was enabled a lot. I was a slow reader as a child, and I myself developed an aversive relationship to reading. And rather than read, I spent a lot of time watching TV and playing video games. Now, if you want to let your children watch TV and play video games, that's okay. They have to have things that they do for themselves that they enjoy doing. But I did it to excess, and I neglected reading. Now, that might sound crazy to you for those of you that have followed me, because as you know, I am a high-volume reader. I mean, I've already read, I've completed 3 books this year, and I'm currently reading, actually 2 books right now, so I'm reading my 4th and 5th book at the same time. And I probably read, I don't know, I'd have to look, but I probably read upwards of 30 to 40 books last year and books the year before that. So I'm a very devout reader. But growing up, I was enabled, and I didn't like reading, so my parents didn't make me read. Not even my school assignments, not that school is education. But I know that that made me weaker. And as a parent, I have to go out of my way not to enable my child. Now, keep in mind, I also am firmly against putting undue pressures on your child. You have to allow them to follow their interest. But what I would do is sit down with my child and talk to my children about the downfalls of too much television, the downfalls of too much video games, and the benefits of reading, and encourage balance in their life. And if you are loving to your children and they know you have their best interest at heart, and you let them know that you want them to have fun, but you also want them to grow as people, they will do the reading, and they will make that a part of their life. So you have to balance these lines as parents, and I'm not saying I have the perfect balance, but these are the things we should be thinking about. And we can only think about them when we know thyself. And then school versus education. My father, he Vietnam vet, great guy, never went to college. My mother, I think, probably just believed in the school system a little bit more. But school was very much the focus of my education. And, I mean, it did me well. I graduated, I hate saying this because it's douchey, but I graduated my master's program with a 4.0 GPA. I was given the award for the #1 student in my program. Looking back at my education, I laugh because I don't think I learned anything valuable. From my, I mean, I guess I learned, I'm very good at writing. I learned that from school, so that's good. I'm good at studying and memorizing. But school was my education. And because of that, like, my father was a master builder. He could build anything with his hands. He's an incredible man. But they didn't make it a point. I mean, I did things with my father, but I always viewed it as chores. Like, oh, take the hammer and hammer. When it should have been made clear to me that building and learning to do things with my hands was part of my education. And because of that, now as I've gotten older, I ask my dad questions, and I'm learning these things. I've been building things in my yard, and I'm probably gonna. My goal is to build an entire shed with my hands before May, so I'm looking forward to that. But that's part of my self-knowledge, knowing myself that I didn't do that and I should have, and I have to make it a point to teach my child these skills. And that will be a huge part of his education. And again, this isn't a knock on my parents. It's, you have to know where you came from in order to be the best parent you can be. Because when we achieve self-knowledge, what we do is we take our hammer to the cycle. We smash the cycle. Smash the cycle. And that is our objective as parents. Achieve self-knowledge so that you don't perpetuate the cycles and pass your own flaws onto your children. Now, your flaws might not be as pronounced. I hope they're not. They might not be as pronounced as yelling in front of your children. They might not be as pronounced as hitting your children. I certainly hope they're not. They might not be as pronounced as sexual abuse. I really, really, really hope they're not. Do you smoke in front of your child? Do you want your child to be a smoker? They will do as they see, not as you say. They will do as you do. Do you want your child to drink all the time? Do you want your child to eat unhealthy? Do you want to be overprotective of your child or underprotective? But you have to know yourself to know what you are. Do you want your child to see you blame others for your problems so that they blame others for their problem? Hey, Jordan Peterson, how's it going? And you certainly don't want them to be ignored. Know thyself, and that will make you an infinitely better parent. Please follow my other pages, Classical Learner on YouTube. Over the next few months, that's going to become my primary channel. That will be the only place you could find me. I am slowly growing it. Also follow it on Facebook. I am going to post the links right here. If you wanted to support me financially, support what I'm doing, you can do so at www.patreon.com/FFRnews for as little as $1 monthly. Together we can change the world. And if you have any comments on this post, please leave them afterwards. Let me know what you're thinking about. If you wanted to do an exercise, you can write down your own self-knowledge, some of your strengths, some of your weaknesses. And the things you write are great because they only give me ideas about what I could podcast about in the future. So, as always, and if you have any questions, always feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll do a whole podcast on them. So, as always, power to the individual and long live liberty.